¿Podría sobrevivir en Gensokyo? Es una teoría.
You have just been spirited away to Gensokyo, the hidden supernatural world populated primarily by man-eating yokai. What do? For the superpowered protagonists of the Touhou project, life is simple and easygoing, but as an ordinary human, do you have what it takes to survive, or for that matter, thrive? Today, I will be answering that question given everything we know about Gensokyo and its residents. But in order to get a solid answer, I'll be setting a few rules for this theoretical scenario. Our goal will not simply be to survive and escape. That's simple as it is. Along with explaining the necessary journey, I am going to answer whether you could settle down in Gensokyo permanently, and how difficult it would be depending on where your preferred location is. As for why anyone would want to live outside the village, well, you tell me. We will assume you start with no meta-knowledge of Gensokyo. This means nothing about Gensokyo itself, its residents, or its inherent dangers. No performing actions that would only make sense without the requisite knowledge. If you wanted to head straight to the Scarlet Devil Mansion, you wouldn't think to do that unless you, among other reasons, knew that the mansion even existed, that walking into a vampire's mansion wouldn't be a death sentence, and that doing this would benefit your goal. Knowledge of Japanese myth and yokai is perfectly fine, but I will still assume you start with minimal understanding to maximize difficulty. You will arrive with only your cell phone and any personal effects that you would typically have. And last but certainly not least, we will be assuming you cannot read or write Japanese, meaning you will need to learn. Though if you're more capable than what I'm assuming, I encourage you to see what parts of this journey you can omit, and maybe complete faster. So without further ado, let's begin. Outsiders typically wander into Gensokyo without even realizing it thanks to border fluctuations caused by Yukari Yakumo, the yokai of boundaries. From here, there are three possible locations you could enter Gensokyo from. The first is near the Hakure Shrine, which is the best case scenario as it means you'll be able to seek temporary shelter there. You'll likely run into Reimu, who typically leads outsiders back the way they came. That's a problem. For one, you wouldn't be able to communicate with Reimu through words, and even if you did, you wouldn't know that you're in some fantasy world unless you saw a yokai or something flying around, so you wouldn't have any reason to protest her leading you back out, ending your run. But if you ran into On or saw someone flying, you'd have a plausible reason to stay and question your situation. In the best case, you could run into Marissa, who likely knows enough English to communicate with you. Regardless, you need to build enough reason and suspicion on your own to ask to stay. Otherwise, your journey ends here. If you insisted that you did not want to go back, Reimu likely wouldn't protest and instead lead you to the human village. Congratulations, you just survived the most dangerous part of your entire journey. And if that didn't seem like it, that's because you got the easy start. The other two are Muenzuka and the Road of Reconsideration, two of the most dangerous places for a human in Gensokyo. As these locations are connected and fairly similar, I will be grouping them together for a survival plan. The Road of Reconsideration gets its name from the humans who arrive here. Those without relatives and those who try to end their own lives unknowingly drift across this road, ending up in Muenzuka. The majority who appear here are described as lonely, depressed, spiteful, or simply criminals, and that's not a coincidence. Yukari is the cause for being spirited away, but the cases here are far from random. Before the events of Embodiment of Scarlet Devil, an event called the Vampire Incident prompted a contract with stronger regulations on attacking human villagers. This was important as Gensokyo's continued existence relies on maintaining the status quo. However, in return, yokai would be supplied outsiders to feast on. But how would a continuous number of humans from the outside world be supplied without raising an alarm? By taking ones nobody would miss, or whose time was nearing its end through age or otherwise. And their destination? Muenzuka. To arrive here means you've already been designated as food for yokai, and you wouldn't even know you're already on the plate. Outsiders explicitly do not apply to the aforementioned contract, so you are free game to be eaten. Your continued survival at this point would rely on your survival instincts, intuition, and a fair bit of luck. Yokai you come across may not seem monstrous, leading to a false sense of security before inevitable doom. And unfortunately for you, the village is nowhere close. You could say that your arrival here is, by design, a death sentence. Survival is slim. One possible stroke of luck would be if you ran into the owner of Korindo, Renosuke, who both frequents the area and whose store's not too far away. If you manage to run into him, he would likely have you sent back to the human village. Unfortunately, he most likely does not understand English, but you would be safe. Otherwise, you would have to traverse Gensokyo with a target painted on your back without even knowing it. Your clothes would give you away as an outsider, signaling that you are not protected by the contract. Gensokyo is mostly forested, mountainous land, meaning it is difficult to traverse and navigate. As for how big it is, we don't really know, but we can estimate at least some tens of kilometers in diameter. So even if you were in good physical shape, you would have to hope you'd find the village or some sort of safe landmark by complete accident. And of course, hope you didn't get spirited away past sundown. After all of this, you might just make it to the human village by the skin of your teeth. That said, if you aren't someone that would be designated as food by Yukari, you would arrive at the shrine instead, so you can determine where you would start. So where do we begin? If you met Marissa, she could bring you to the village and act as a translator. But even if you didn't, there are actually a few people in the village who we know can communicate in English. These are Akyu and Kosuzu. While Akyu knows English, Kosuzu can comprehend anything written, meaning you can communicate to her through writing. But now, you have officially arrived. Once the village understands that you're hoping to stay, they would set you up with a living quarters in exchange for labor. This isn't too far-fetched, as Akyu states in perfect memento and strict sense that outsiders sometimes choose to stay. But more importantly, such outsiders are treasured as they hold unique knowledge. So you wouldn't be seen as a freeloader needing shelter. You would be seen as an investment. And the better you are at selling yourself as valuable,
I would really prefer if you would be quiet.
the easier your time in the village will be. And you're going to be here a while. The shelter in question probably wouldn't be much. Likely a one-room shack with a fire pit, a bed, and room to store some personal belongings. You wouldn't be able to do much here except eat, sleep, cook, and read. But over time you might be able to purchase new tools, utilities, or simply a bigger home. Alternatively, one of the villagers may be willing to rent out a room to you. You would also be given some villager clothes, taking the target off of your back from wandering yokai. And if your end goal was to simply live in the village, congratulations, you've already succeeded. Learning to communicate would come with time. For everyone else, your journey is just beginning. After staying here for a little while, you decide that you want to survive in Gensokyo on your own terms. We're going to track your theoretical stats with this nice little gamified character sheet. You guys like games, right? Again, I'm assuming the worst case for most stats here. Physical fitness and yokai knowledge can carry over, but there will be information regarding yokai unique to Gensokyo. The first thing you'll want to aim for is raising your physical fitness to a decent level, enough to be able to walk fairly long distances on rough terrain. Let's say that's C rank. If you're below that, your new village diet of healthy, unprocessed food and activity level should naturally bring that towards at least C rank. But while that is going on, you will be learning your most important skill, speech. You can apparently achieve decent Japanese fluency through complete immersion in around 2 years, but you can probably manage basic communication after a few months. Even if your plan is to leave, village life has a lot of benefits. You would passively be taking in village culture and meeting people. Not to mention, the occasional festival may take place outside of the village, giving you reasons to visit new locations. While we are going for efficiency, you would have time to slow down and enjoy the time when necessary. After all, it's going to contribute to your understanding of Gensokyo anyway. About 3 months in, you've improved your physical fitness a bit, learned about Gensokyo, and have even started to learn a bit of Japanese. Unfortunately, your other skills will come through reading, and fluent reading will likely take longer than just 2 years of study. But this is only the beginning of your problems. Recall that you would be expected to work in order to stay. This could be anything from field work to other menial work that requires little communication. We could base work hours off averages in Meiji-era Japan, but the village may have an easier time maintaining themselves. To be safe, I will assume 12-hour workdays, 6 days a week. That doesn't leave you much room to do everything we need. Or does it? The Hieda Temple School is a terakuya located in the human village. Terakuya were educational institutions that primarily taught reading and writing to children. However, there was no age limit to attend. This is interesting as terakuya were abolished when the government issued the Educational System Order in 1872, making public schools compulsory, more than 10 years before the border was created. Literacy was actually very high in the Meiji era. The village might consider it more advantageous to put you through language schooling than to have you completely clueless. They would still have you work part-time, but you could attend classes as well, thereby improving our initial estimates of your reading and writing after 3 months in the village. We could keep grinding away until reaching fluency, but we can do better. Say hello to your new best friend, Kosuzu. If you expressed your ultimate goal to her, she might suggest the path that Marissa took, becoming a magician. There are other ways to gain power outside of being a magician like Dharmic arts, hermit abilities, and onmyodo, and I'll briefly talk about Buddhism and Taoism later, but we are going for what I consider the optimal path in terms of time, which would be traditional magic. Magic needs to be learned through study, but who says all those magical books are in Japanese? Along with giving you a map of Gensokyo, you could expect Kosuzu to give you the location of at least 2 different places for books on magic. The Kiresame Magic Shop, run by Marissa out of her home in the Forest of Magic, and the library within the Scarlet Devil Mansion. The former is simple in that you could travel there and ask either to rent or purchase basic magical books. Or, Marissa might point you to Alice Margatroyd who lives nearby. Not only is she another resident of Gensokyo who might know English, but she is a magician that might lend out basic books. Akyu lists the forest as a medium threat for humans, but with decent endurance, a quick trip or 2 in and out couldn't hurt. This means you could start to learn the basics of magic pretty early on. As for the SDM, we are going to save them for later. Fast forward a couple months, you'll continue to slowly improve your Japanese, but also learn the theory behind magic. So what's there to learn? I'll save the details of magic for another time, but in theory, a magician can create almost any spell if they can figure out how to construct it. And before you ask, yes, that could include magic for learning new languages. If you were lucky, one of the resident magicians might know such a spell, or at least how to do it. Putting aside compensation and time, it would still be worth it if the wait was less than 2 years. It would free up time studying Japanese in favor of other important pursuits. This is a lot of ifs and maybes, so I'm not going to work it into our sheet, but if you did, you could immediately set your speech and reading fluency to max rank. Instead, we'll be starting with something simple: flight. Achieving free flight is single-handedly the most important benchmark on your journey, but despite that, it has consistently been shown to be quite common. Reimu is airborne by Touhou 3, while Marissa has flight in Touhou 2, when the both of them are much younger. Likewise, almost every named character, regardless of what they draw power from, are capable of flight. Therefore, we could reasonably deduce that if you focus on training to achieve flight, you could likely do so quickly with enough concentrated effort. I don't want to give a hard estimate on how long flight would take to learn, but supposing you learned magic by month 3, I think 9 months of study would be more than sufficient. This brings us to the 1-year mark. At this point, your Japanese should be shaping up nicely, you're physically active, and you're passively getting to know Gensokyo. You may even be able to slowly work your way through reading Akyu's Gensokyo Chronicle, granting you a significant increase in your knowledge of Gensokyo. You've also hopefully saved up a bit of money on the side, but now that you have flight, you have more options. For one, you can explore Gensokyo more freely. You won't be able to fight off a yokai, but resources that might be difficult to acquire for villagers would be easier for you, turning into a nice money-making opportunity. And you will need money. Increasing your magic further will require more books and research materials, but if you plan to live outside of the village, you will need a home, and depending on where you intend to stay, that may require purchasing one or commissioning one to be built. Hence, we will start increasing our income ahead of time. At this point, I will talk about the SDM. Not only do they regularly hire workers at the mansion, but the residents are known to speak English, or at the very least, Remelia does. The library also has any books you could possibly need to accomplish your goal. You could certainly go here at the 3-month mark, or even earlier if you learned of the opportunity. Workers are provided 3 meals a day, uniforms, and a place to sleep. Going by what we see in Sangetsuse, it's pretty comfy. You can expect high quality food and decent bedding. You probably wouldn't have your own room though. While the work advertisement states that there are no breaks or pay, the majority of staff are fairies and not all that useful. You could get away with doing less and having significantly more free time than if you were in the village as a result. A lot of people who I've seen talk about this topic consider it a good early option. So why did I wait until the 1-year mark to bring it up? Very simple. You would lose access to the schooling in the village, which would significantly hamper our reading experience, and we need that long term to access more books for magic. And while the SDM has a great number of magical books, according to Akyu, the library is not open to the general public. It might seem appealing, but heading here as soon as possible simply is not efficient. If you arrive in Gensokyo with fluency, it becomes your best choice based on free time alone. However, this still has the issue of the work giving you no salary. Building up funds is going to be important long term, so I would not recommend this route unless your end goal is to live here anyway. At this point, you are entering the endgame. Everything from here on is simply repetition. Continue your education, maintain decent physical fitness, build up your finances, explore and learn about Gensokyo, and of course, study your magic. After flight, you would want to make an effort in learning defensive and offensive magic in order to defend yourself, which is important if you plan to live outside of an established residence. How long you spend doing this really depends on where you want to settle down. While you could continue schooling up until fluency, towards the end you can learn through self-study with little loss in efficiency. So you could set off earlier than 2 years if you made enough money. In fact, you'll find that your final roadblock may not be magic or a language barrier. It's just a matter of getting a home. So much for escaping the housing crisis. Lucky for you, it's still easier to get a house in Gensokyo. So let's go over your choices. As previously stated, living in the village is pretty simple. You can accomplish this on your first day. You could completely forego learning magic and instead go full rune factory. Get to know the villagers, participate in festivals, find a profession, make money, and pretty soon you won't be the foreign outsider anymore. You'll be a full-fledged villager, living happily yet ignorant to the underlying truth to the village. Some other locations that you could move to as soon as you became aware of them include the SDM, Murin Temple, and the Divine Spirit Mausoleum in Senkai. In the case of the latter two, instead of picking up magic, you could practice Buddhism or train to become a hermit. Buddhism would grant you access to Hojutsu or Dharmic arts, while pursuing a hermit lifestyle in Senkai would eventually open up Senjutsu or hermit arts. These powers would need to be built up over years of hard work, but you could certainly do so instead of the magician approach. Most locations beyond this point will require you to forage or hunt for your own food, at least until you can learn the abandoned food magic, which will take a while. In some cases, you may be close enough to visit the human village semi-regularly for supplies, but between your studies and magic, you should be able to live off the land with little concern. Hunting could be trivialized with magic, edible plants and mushrooms can be gathered, and water could be collected from clean sources or produced with magic. The next few locations require some degree of self-defense and a home of your own, which would still take considerable time. With the home, this is where money would come into play. While you would have a hard time paying villagers to drag materials outside of the village to build a home, you might be able to enlist the kappa with enough money. But how much money? Well, even if housing might be more affordable in Gensokyo, something tells me even a year or two of savings wouldn't be enough to cover materials, construction, and furnishing. And you probably don't want to take out a loan with them. So if you didn't want to wait too long, you would have to get creative with business strategies. Maybe you could dabble in yokai extermination work, or make use of the skills from your time in the outside world. You might even utilize outsider technology purchased at Korindo. Alternatively, there may be magic that could be used to construct livable spaces. This is based on the fact that in Silent Sinner and Blue, Patrulli was able to prepare most of the rocket they flew to the moon in less than a month. So you would either have to learn the requisite magic and gather all of the materials, or hire a magician who would be both able and willing. Either way has its difficulties, but at the end, you would have your very own home in one of these locations. The next few locations will be even more difficult, needing significantly higher magical capability to survive. As far as the letter rankings for magic are concerned, I consider each step up exponentially more difficult. It's possible, but it will take time. Thankfully, if you're diligent and capable, your progress should be comparable to that of Marissa. For the upper half of Yokai Mountain, you would be at odds with the Tengu. Outsiders that attempt to climb the mountain, yokai or human, are chased out relentlessly by Tengu patrols. The only exception is that visitors are allowed to visit Moriya Shrine via the ropeway. You would have a very difficult time getting permission to build a home here unless you somehow made a deal with the Tengu. Makai and Old Hell are only what I would consider difficult because of how dangerous they are. Old Hell, from what we know, is quite lively and likely has homes for sale. You would simply need to be strong enough to hold your own down there. As for Makai, we know that we can access it via the Palanquin ship, so if you really wanted to, you probably could go there. Just know that Sakuya in PCB states, hell is not as scary as Makai, so take that as you will. And last but not least, the animal realm. Honestly, you could probably consider this one impossible, but maybe if you became absurdly strong after some period of time and you really wanted to live there for some reason, you could probably be accepted somewhere. Maybe. These last few locations are what I would consider impossible to live in. Muenzaka is one for the reasons mentioned earlier in the video, and the last 4 locations are Pure Lands. They do not possess the innate impurities of Earth. There are no seasons, no day or night, and things do not change or decay. Even with abandoned food magic, it's hard to say what would happen if you tried to live here. In the case of Heaven or the Lunar Capital, though, they definitely would not let you in. So there's your options, but some of you might be bummed that your favorite girl might live in one of the impossible areas. But hey, nothing is stopping you from visiting. Unless they're on the moon. in which case I'd suggest lowering your standards a bit. But if you can manage to set off on your own successfully, congratulations, you can now say you survived Gensokyo in the truest sense. So what's next? Well, you must have picked a location for a reason. Maybe over the course of your journey you got to know some of those residents and wanted to stick around. But of course, maybe you thought of some things I didn't. I'd love to hear your own ideas and how quickly you might be able to accomplish this survival challenge. Unless you subscribe to the idea that there's no way in hell anybody makes it past being a wagey in the rice fields. In any case, I hope to see you again soon. Thanks for watching. Oh hey, it's you. I didn't say you could come here. You must have missed the part in the guide where it says, I was here first. Now if you'll excuse me, I'm a bit busy working on some, videos. Yeah. Bye.
In the night, just the night, and we are here just wide awake.
Y eso sería muy difícil porque tendrías que estudiar demasiado después. Y bueno, es que este video no es bastante. Adiós.